The next speaker is Dr. J. Anderson Thomson, Jr. Dr. Thomson is an American psychiatrist and author who has 42 years of experience working in both criminal and civil cases. He is a trustee of the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science and a board member of the Center for Inquiry. I met Dr. Thomson in 2007 when he spoke at a conference I organized in Crystal City, Virginia. Now, 16 years ago, he impressed conference attendees, and today, I'm sure he will garner more fans and many more compliments. Dr. Thomson will present Free Will, the Crimes of the Criminal Justice System. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Margaret. Nice to see you. Thank you, Margaret. Thanks for the introduction. And I'd like everybody to start by picking a movie. Just pick a movie. Get that in your head. Okay, pick a second movie. And if you've got those in your head. Now, why did those two movies occur to you? I thought of Casablanca. I can sort of fill in the thought that, well, that was because it's one of my favorite movies, but I've got tons of favorite movies. Why did that one show up? And the argument here is that we really don't know. And if you step back from it for a moment, think about all the movies you know, okay? Were you free to choose all those movies that you know and know well that did not occur to you? Where's your free will? That little exercise looks like a choice of completely unconstrained free will. Yet I hope you can start to see that those two movies just occurred to you for reasons that are really beyond your discovery, in a situation that is unconstrained, what we would think of as free will. Imagine that you're on this road, if you would, for a minute. You've never been there before, and which one are you going to choose? Everybody make a choice, okay? Again, seems like free will. I'm going to go right. My left cortex will create an explanation that it's because I like to go uphill. But here's the interesting thing. Your brain made that decision, and it shows up on scans anywhere between a half a second and, in some studies, 10 seconds before you became consciously aware of that choice. So your brain chose which road you were going to go down before you were conscious of making that choice. All right? We've all got free will. Use your free will not to hear the sound of my voice right now. Anybody succeed at that? All right. Use your free will not to understand what I'm saying right now. Was anybody able to exercise their free will and not understand what I'm saying right now? The reason I'm going through this is these are some of the exercises that I hope will start you thinking about. Maybe my free choices, or what seem like unconstrained free will choices, are not exactly free will. Think about this. If you cannot control your next thought, and you do not know what it will be until it appears, where's your free will? Where's your free will in that? Now, the reason I'm going through this is just to start to give you a taste of what I'm going to argue today, which is that there is no free will. Free will, as we feel it, as we understand it, does not exist. That neuroscience and our neurobiology discoveries have shown that you can't map it onto the brain, that we do not have free will. We have a will, but it is not free, and it's influenced by myriads of factors that go, when you make a decision, factors that go from a millisecond before you make that decision, probably back through your childhood, through your parents, through evolution, primate evolution, millions of years ago. And everybody's familiar with this view of justice and the blindfolded lady. I'm using it in a different sense here because our justice system and its retributive punishment, the argument is it depends on maintaining that blindfold, but a blindfold where the criminal justice system does not understand the causes of human behavior, does not accept the scientific neuroscience, neurobiologic revolution, which I'm going to argue shows that there is no such thing as free will. Now, here's the problem we have, is that it is like during the Copernican revolution, when Galileo faced the Vatican and the Catholic Church, arguing for the Copernicus discovery of the heliocentric system. Even today, all of us feel like the sun rises in the east, crosses the sky, and sets in the west. But we all know intellectually that that's not true, that the earth is rotating around the sun. But Galileo was imprisoned for trying to maintain that view. He was up against the Catholic Church. And the argument here is going to be that the neurobiology that shows us we don't have free will, we are not just up against the Catholic Church and the Abrahamic religions, which depend on free will, but in the criminal justice system, we're up against the Supreme Court. And it goes back to a decision in 1978. Warren Burger was the Chief Justice and was the author of the majority opinion, and and made it quite clear in the case of U.S. versus Grayson that a deterministic view of was inconsistent with the underlying principles of the criminal justice system. And he went further, that free will was a universal and persistent foundation in our system, particularly in our approach to punishment, sentencing, and incarceration, and insisted that the freedom of the human will was basically a moral obligation, that individuals had an obligation, a moral obligation to choose between good and evil. We had free will. It was the basis of our criminal justice system, and that's what we're up against. And the argument here is that our criminal justice system is blind right now to science. And we have consequences, we have punishment, harsh punishment, retributive justice. I don't think that is a correct phrase, retributive justice. We have retribution, and the speakers today have laid it out far better than I can. What are my goals? My goals for my 20 minutes here are the following. I want to have you start to think, if you aren't already, about being a free will skeptic, becoming skeptical about the presence, our capacity for free will, because the argument here is we don't have it. We have a will, but it is not free. And the roadmap is going to be, I'm going to spend most of my time on free will skepticism and giving you some of the case, and then obviously we'll link it with the criminal justice system. Before I do that, I want to thank particularly Judy for inviting me. It's nice to see Margaret after all these years, and all the other people that have put this conference together. To Dave Rice last night for helping me with IT. I appreciate it. Didn't look like it when I started, but without David, it might have been worse. And I particularly want to thank Sam Harris, Jerry Coyne, Robert Sapolsky. The information you're going to hear comes from their work. If you like this, thank them. They're responsible for the ideas that I'm going to try to get across to you. So, free will is based on two assumptions: that we are the conscious author of our thoughts, our desires, our intentions, and our actions. And we all feel that. It's like, we feel it like, every day, like the sun waking up. Problem with that is that it's as if our consciousness is like an iceberg that's just floating on the sea. All there is what you see, as if there is nothing underneath it that is influencing the motion of that iceberg. And what we just heard from Fritzi Horstman makes a case better than I can. Of all the things that move the individual, that influence the decisions of the individual, and severe childhood experiences are just one of many. Also, Denise, she was making my case as well. All the things that influence, in her situation, obviously, people who commit murder. The most important thing is that the other assumption is that we were somehow free to think and do differently in the past. That's the essence of the criminal justice system. It's also the essence of religion, and we have souls and we make free choices, and that allows God to punish us. It's unfortunately way too tied in with the criminal justice system. but all of us feel like we could have done otherwise. The empirical truth is we couldn't. You think you could have had that V8 when you drank the Coke. No. When you chose that Coke, that was the only choice you could make. You can't rewind it and change the state of the universe. That was the only choice you could make. Let me illustrate it another way. You can choose to leave right now. Hit the leave button and leave. But you are not now free to choose not to have come to this meeting today. When you made that choice, there was no other at that moment in time, and it was influenced by more factors than you're aware of. And most of those factors, almost all of them, you had no choice in, you had no responsibility for. So again, that's what leads to this notion of free will impacts, it defines our criminal justice system and all the nastiness and brutality that you already know about and you heard more about today. And that concept, I'm going to argue, is injurious. It underlies retribution, harsh retribution, underlies vindictive punishment. Just to give you one example, what is the greatest predictor statistically of youth and adult violence? Right? As strong as cigarette smoking and lung cancer. It is heart rate at age 3. Where's the free will in that? At age 3, you already are fearless, and it sets you up for a high risk of violence as a young adult or adult. Where's the free will in that? Let's put a microscope on free will a little bit tighter. What are the possibilities? We either have complete free will, or we have none, or we sort of have somewhere in between, right? And here's where I'm going to disagree with Denise. Denise says, she made a distinction that, we have free will, but these people with severe developmental history somehow don't. My argument is different, that she doesn't have free will either. The things that influenced her allowed her to move towards law school and not violence, the history that she outlined. The other thing, Denise, that I would like to disagree with you is that Muggsy Bogues was 5'3" and played in the NBA for 14 years. He gave me hope for years. It was ultimately hopeless, but 5'3". All right, so how do we define free will? Free will is the ability and power to think and choose and act voluntarily. It is unfortunately referred to as libertarianism. Don't think politics. Libertarianism is pure free will. We're the agent, we're the decider of our decisions. It is libertarianism, pure, unadulterated free will. Determinism is that the past predicts the present and the future, and that human actions are completely controlled by previous conditions, which operate under the laws of nature. Okay? The mind is what the brain does. The brain is a physical system. All behaviors are consequences of prior causes. And when you make a decision, it is influenced by things, sensory perceptions from 1 second ago, as I said, all the way back millions of years, but all the way back to, you didn't choose your parents, you didn't choose your genetics. You didn't choose the early developmental history that Fritzi Hortzman outlined, the terrible things that happened that we know impact propensity for violence and crime. And determinism states, and this is the position I'm taking, is there's no known law of nature that it allows you to meaningfully speak of free will. So you've got free will on one side, determinism on another, and there are people in the philosophy community who try to bridge the gap. A bridge, I'm going to show you, I don't think is there. This outlines it. So if you think determinism is false and we have free will, you're a libertarian. If you think determinism is true and we don't have free will, which is the case I'm trying to make for you to consider, then you have what is called hard determinism. And hard determinism, the position I'm advocating, and libertarianism are incompatible. But there is a group called compatibilism, compatibilists. that think, yes, determinism is true, but we also still have our free will, and you get the compatibilist argument. And this includes people that all of us know and love, like Dan Dennett. He's a compatibilist. I disagree with him, but he makes a case. And the idea here is that behavior is determined by cause and effect. It is triggered by, it can be triggered by free moral choices. This is called soft determinism, mitigated free will, libertarian dualism. It has various names. But what it requires is that you have to say that there's some kind of spirit or soul or essence that embodies our free will, and from that emanates our intentions, and that this somehow coexists with our biology, but our biology sometimes constrains it. And what I hope to show you is that, this is wrong. And I hope you can see that this is a door that allows religion in. If we've got an eternal soul that can make decisions, free will decisions, that justifies God's punishment of you and condemnation and all the other awful things we know about in religion. Here are a couple of the problems. The free will homunculus, the fact that the self as we feel it doesn't exist in our brains, and also an extraordinary phenomena that all of us do all the time, but is there, unconscious goal pursuit, conscious pursuit of goals, complex goals that we are never aware of. So what's the free will homunculus? This is, imagine that there's a helmsman in your brain, right? And if you're a guy, we'll call him Wilhelm. If you're a woman, we'll call her Willahelm, all right? And you've got this helmsman in your brain that's sort of in your brain, of your brain, can influence your brain, but is somehow separate of your brain. And nobody critiques this better than Robert Sapolsky, so that to claim compatibilist free will, you've got to invoke this homunculus in your brain that's somehow operating independently of the material rules of the universe, which means basically operating independent of the neurophysiology of your brain that constitute modern science. Somehow it operates independently, but yet is also simultaneously influencing it. It just doesn't work. And here's what we know, that, okay, let's say you got Wilhelm and Willahelm in your brain making decisions. We now know that if my Wilhelm is sort of independently making decisions, we know my decisions are influenced by my blood glucose level, how much the quality and quantity of sleep I had last night, immediate sensory perceptions. My decisions are going to be influenced by what I've heard in the last hours, right? The cognitive load prior to any decision I made, the level of pain, stress, level of stress hormones, particularly the level of stress hormones in the last couple of weeks that impact neuroplasticity. My decisions will be influenced by the presence of an attractive woman or the smell of a sweating, frightened individual. It's also going to be impacted by the culture I was born into. Was it a collectivist culture? Was it individualistic culture? Was it a culture of honor? And that will start to influence my decisions when I'm still just a child. And those cultures are impacted by the ecosystem you grow up in. Deserts produce monotheistic religions. My family socioeconomic status. We now know, for instance, and you heard Fritzi laying out the prefrontal cortex capacities, we know that our prefrontal cortex is profoundly shaped by our social economic status, and you can demonstrate that by age 6, our prenatal environment. Whether our mother smoked cigarettes, drank alcohol, that increases the risk of violence. That prenatal environment and the impact of substances. The perinatal environment, if you have a difficult birth, hypoxic at birth, and particularly the attachment system, the attachment in the first year of life. Quality of attachment in the first year of life is a predictor of later violence. So that's just some of them. And I mean, as I said, I can't do a job better than Fritzi Hortzman in laying out all the adverse childhood experiences that we know impact future criminal behavior. All of us feel like we have a self. Well, let me disabuse you of that. You feel it, but you can't map it onto the brain. We probably have multiple helmspeople in our brain making considerable numbers of decisions. This is just some of them. A self that monitors us, protecting ourselves from physical harm, from disease. A self that makes friends, that competes for status, that tries to attract mates and hold mates. Our attachment system, our caretaking of children, our caretaking of families. These are just some of the selves that operate within us, both independently and overlap. What about unconscious goal pursuit? This is fascinating to me. Now, everybody's familiar with the reality. All of us have organs in our bodies that are making decisions all the time that we're not aware of. And I think everybody here is well aware that men have a particular organ that they're making decisions with all the time. And a lot of them are not good decisions, right? But that's, where's the free will in that? Okay, influenced by hormones, testosterone. All right, this is a very important paper. If you're interested in this topic, I can't recommend it strongly enough. Custer's and Art's paper in 2010 that detail how you can have complicated goals develop, action and the will to carry out those goals triggered, monitoring reward signals, pursuing those goals, and it's completely unconscious. Where's the free will in that? All right, so what is some of the import of the absence of free will? Yes, we have will. Yes, we make decisions, but it isn't free. There are phenomenal influences on our decision making. And what I would ask is, if we understand that we don't have unencumbered free will, are people deserving of punishment? For tragic and terrible things that they do? Do they really deserve punishment? And the punishment that we mete out way too often, as you've heard today. I mean, I was stunned by, I think it was Dr. Larson's 57 out of 100,000 incarceration rate they have versus 10 times the incarceration rate we have. And, is punishment a virtue? Think of the Commonwealth's attorneys that take pride when they run for office about how many people they've punished, how many people they've sentenced to life. In some places, how many capital convictions and death sentences they've gotten. Their opponent won't put anybody to death, right? Is punishment a virtue? Is punishment deserved? Obviously, I'm arguing that no, that needs to be reconceptualized. I'm going to let you all read this. So the essence of this is, for instance, in John Guy's presentation this morning, at that moment in time when he stabbed somebody, could he have done anything else at that point in time? And the argument is obviously no. At that point in time, the choice he made was the only choice he had, and probably much of it was unconscious, right? So to be able to say that one could have done otherwise is to say one would have done or otherwise if things had been different. And you can't go back and rearrange the universe at that point in time. Obviously, we don't know him well, but my guess is that John, if he hadn't, had alcohol that night, who knows if he would have stabbed the individual, right? But that would have taken a shift in how the universe was at that point in time. So again, the only choice that is ever physically available to you is the one you made. That often obviously leads to tragedy. A lot of it is luck, but that's what we're looking at. And having to be, I think, humble before the facts of life, of neurobiology, and just the tremendous role of luck. But that doesn't justify what we do to people who commit crimes. And what I would submit to you is that the burden, given the neurobiology now, the burden of proof really rests on those who argue we can make alternative choices, okay? And the importance here is that the idea that we somehow can go back and make alternative choices, particularly at the time of an offense, they've got to prove. The burden of proof is now on them to show that that ability to alter the universe is possible. They're saying you ought to be able to make different choices, you should have made different choices, but that implies that you could or can make those choices, and the argument here is no. The physical laws of the universe and our neurobiology says no. All right. Now, a lot of people think that free will skepticism means fatalism. What's the point? Why make decisions if we don't have free will? Well, we all are going to have to make choices. We have to make choices all the time. But actually seeing that there is no such thing as free will basically liberates you to understand all the things that impact your choices. The idea of free will, I think, is kind of an arrogant position because it opens us up to understanding that we are open systems. We are tremendously influenced, and there are paths to allowing influences in that will help us. I'm a completely different psychiatrist than I was before I read this work. You know, we're here today at this meeting being changed and hopefully changing other people when we leave, right? So what does that mean? And I can't say it any better than what you have seen today. It means just the basic conception that punishment, particularly severe punishment, is deserved. It's got to go out the window. The notion that somehow punishment is a virtue. And unfortunately, our brains at times get a hit of pleasure when we're punishing people we're angry at. And that's an ancient piece of biology. That's got to go, right? And so our criminal justice system needs to be based on a different model. You've seen it today beautifully with the Scandinavian models, the Norway models. You protect society, you protect the criminal. They're people that are tragically ill, tragically character disordered, tragically the victim of, as we've seen, awful abuse, which leaves them vulnerable to, short fuse on their brainstem. You mitigate, you rehabilitate, you find ways of deterring. And what I hope I've shown you is that we don't have free will. Our decisions, our will is influenced by myriads of factors which we did not choose. And I think the science is clear, and we need to push our criminal justice system. We've got a good basis for pushing our criminal justice system to change, a good scientific basis for pushing our criminal justice to change in the ways that you've heard done so beautifully by other people today. So again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.